Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. In Pakistan, 7 soldiers have been martyred in an exchange of fire with terrorists in Balochistan. The military's media wing said the gun battle took place when the terrorists raided a Frontier Corps checkpost. It said anti-state forces will not be allowed to sabotage hard-earned peace in Balochistan. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan says the whole nation stands with the brave soldiers who face attacks from Indian-backed terrorists. Pakistan has expressed its deep concern over the growing violence in Afghanistan. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the Afghan government must fulfill its responsibility of ensuring the safety of civilians. It also reaffirmed Islamabad's commitment to peace in the war-torn country. Turkey says Khalifa Haftar's army and supporters will be considered legitimate targets if they attack its forces. Defense Minister Hulusi Akar was speaking to Turkish troops during a visit to Tripoli. This comes after the Libyan National Army commander threatened to attack Ankara's forces deployed in Libya. In India, 2 protesting farmers have died of cardiac arrest at Delhi borders in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, union leaders have agreed on a fresh round of talks with the centre on Tuesday, but say they will hold a tractor march and step up agitation if the government does not discuss the repeal of laws. Braving harsh cold, farmers have camped against contentious agricultural reforms for over a month now. The European Union is launching a coordinated vaccine rollout to fight COVID-19 and protect nearly 450 million people. Meanwhile, Canada is the latest country to report cases of the new variant first detected in the United Kingdom. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 58 lives and infected more than 1,800 people overnight. The nationwide death toll has risen to 9,874. Globally, there are 1.7 million fatalities and over 18 million infections. Pakistan trailed New Zealand by 401 runs at the end of day 2 of the first test at Bay Oval in Mount Mangoi. The visitors ended day 2 at 30 for 1 after losing their opener Shah Masood for just 10 runs. Earlier, New Zealand were bowled out for 431 with Kane Williamson top scoring with 129 runs. These were the headlines. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We start from Pakistan, where 7 soldiers have been martyred in an exchange of fire with terrorists in Balochistan. The military's media wing said the gun battle took place when the terrorists raided a Frontier Corps checkpost. It said anti-state forces will not be allowed to sabotage hard-earned peace in Balochistan. The security forces have launched a large-scale search operation to apprehend terrorists on the run. Prime Minister Imran Khan has condemned the incident and offered condolences to families of the martyred soldiers. He said the whole nation stands with the soldiers who face attacks from Indian-backed terrorists. Islamabad has repeatedly pointed to India's involvement in terrorist activities in Balochistan and other areas of the country. It has earlier presented a dossier containing details of India's state sponsorship of terrorism. Also, Pakistan has expressed its deep concerns over the growing violence in Afghanistan. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the Afghan government must fulfill its responsibility of ensuring the safety of its civilians. The Foreign Office also reaffirmed Islamabad's commitment to peace in the war-torn country. It said Pakistan believes there is no military solution to the Afghan conflict and a political process is the only way forward. Violence in the country has risen significantly despite the two sides being engaged in peace talks. Prime Minister Imran Khan has repeatedly called for reduction in violence in Afghanistan. Now, Azad Jammu and Kashmir President Sardar Masood Khan has called on India to stop the use of force against Kashmiris. In a statement, he demanded India to pay attention to the legitimate call for the right to self-determination. He urged India to resolve the Kashmir conflict per the aspirations of the people of the valley. Khan expressed grave concern over India's torture against thousands of Kashmiri youth in jails. He urged the United Nations and other rights groups to ensure the release of these youth and political prisoners. Now, in India, 2 protesting farmers have died of cardiac arrest at Delhi borders in the past 24 hours. Braving harsh cold, farmers have camped against the contentious agricultural reforms for over a month now. Meanwhile, union leaders have agreed on a fresh round of talks with the centre on Tuesday, but say they will hold a tractor march and step up agitation if the government does not discuss the repeal of laws. So far, 5 rounds of talks between the protesting unions and the government have failed. In another development, farmers from Uttar Pradesh are heading to New Delhi to join the demonstrations. Moving on, Bangladesh is set to move 1,000 more Rohingya refugees to the remote island of Bhasan Char in the Bay of Bengal this month. Dhaka relocated more than 1,600 earlier despite calls from rights groups. A deputy government official in charge of refugees says the relocation is voluntary. He says the move will ease chronic overcrowding in camps that are home to more than 1 million Rohingya. But humanitarian workers say some of the refugees have been coerced into going to the flood-prone island. The UN said it was not allowed to carry out a safety assessment of the island and not involved in the transfers. Now, Turkey says Khalifa Haftar's army and supporters will be considered legitimate targets if they attack its forces. Defense Minister Hulusi Akar was speaking to Turkish troops during a visit to Tripoli. Akar said Ankara will target Haftar's men and allies everywhere and they will have nowhere left to run. This comes after the Libyan National Army commander threatened to attack Ankara's forces deployed in Libya. Turkey backs the government of National Accord, which has been fighting the Libyan National Army for years. It recently extended the mandate of Turkish forces deployed in the country by 18 months. Now, in Israel, thousands of Israelis took to the streets against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. The country is facing protests over his corruption charges and coronavirus handling for over 6 months now. The crowd rallied outside his official residence, blowing whistles, waving signs and flags, and calling for his resignation. Several dozen demonstrators also clashed with police. Protesters were forcibly evacuated by officers and 3 people were arrested. Other protests took place throughout the country at plazas, intersections and highway overpasses. Israel faces the 4th election in 2 years after Netanyahu's fractured ruling coalition failed to pass a budget. Now, in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to focus on levelling up the country after securing the post-Brexit trade deal. In an interview, Johnson said the deal will provide new legislative and regulatory freedoms. Johnson added that big changes were coming and it was now the time to seize the opportunity of Brexit. He said his government has a very clear agenda to use this moment to unite and spread opportunity. Johnson said with animal welfare, data and chemicals were areas where the UK could diverge from EU standards. But fishermen's leaders have accused him of caving in and sacrificing their interests to reach the agreement. Lawmakers will vote on the deal in Parliament on the 30th of December. Now, Central African Republic, people are voting to elect a new president and parliament amid threats and escalating violence. The government is trying to hold off a rebel advance on the capital, Bangui. Heavy gunfire was reported early on Sunday in the town of Boar, around 435 kilometers northwest of Bangui. Ahead of the polls, 3 UN peacekeepers were killed by unidentified combatants. President Faustin Archange Touadera is considered the favorite in the poll of 17 candidates. His main challenger is Anicet Georges de Leguel, a former prime minister who finished runner-up in 2016. The election will go to a second round if no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote. Now, in Venezuela, the opposition-held National Assembly has approved a statute extending its term into 2021. The vote paves way for opposition leader Juan Guaido to retain his position as Parliament Speaker. The statute provides for a small group of legislators to carry out the National Assembly's functions. Juan Guaido says the Parliament will continue to work despite threats from the dictatorial regime. The move follows a disputed election in December in which pro-Maduro allies won 91% of seats in the Congress. Now, 4 major opposition parties in the South American country boycotted the election, alleging fraud. The socialist-controlled Congress is scheduled to be sworn in on January 5th. The European Union is launching a coordinated vaccine rollout to fight COVID-19 and protect nearly 450 million people. Meanwhile, Canada is the latest country to report cases of the new variant first detected in the UK. Globally, there are over 80 million infections and 1.7 million fatalities. More details in this report.
As the hopes of vaccine rollout provided some relief to people, new variants of the virus have created confusion and panic at the same time. In the US, scientists are analyzing the test results in California to see if the new strain has emerged in the country. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the second shipment of Pfizer vaccines has arrived in Mexico. And the World Health Organization says COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic the world witnesses.
History tells us that this will not be the last pandemic, and epidemics are a fact of life. But with investments in public health, supported by an all-of-government, all-of-society, One Health approach, we can ensure that our children and their children inherit a safer, more resilient, and more sustainable world.
In Europe, infections linked to the people who arrived from the UK were reported in Spain, Switzerland, Sweden and France. More areas across England have been placed under Tier 4 restrictions to curb the mutant virus, while Japan is set to ban most non-resident foreign nationals from entering the country for a month from Monday. Australia's largest city, Sydney, will find out early next week whether it will be allowed any public New Year celebrations.
The Northern Beaches community, can I thank you again for your patience. I appreciate frustration levels will be increasing as we get closer to New Year's Eve and as the days of stay-at-home increase. We hope to have some clear information to everybody tomorrow or at the latest the day after on what New Year's Eve and the next few weeks look like for everybody, including those communities on the Northern Beaches.
Elsewhere in Asia, China has reported 10 new imported cases and 12 locally transmitted infections on the mainland. South Korea's daily COVID-19 cases fell below 1,000 as the country struggles to contain the virus.
Now, U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has urged President Donald Trump to sign the $2.3 trillion COVID aid and spending package. In a statement, Biden described Trump's refusal to sign the bill as an abdication of responsibility.
The bill was critical and needed to be signed into law immediately. He warned of devastating consequences if Trump continues to delay signing the bill into law. Calling the bill a disgrace, President Trump refused to sign it into law and asked the Congress for amendment. In a tweet, Trump said he simply wanted people to get $2,000 rather than the measly $600. The Labor Department's data shows around 14 million people will be affected if the president does not sign the bill. It will also trigger a partial government shutdown starting from Tuesday. Millions of government workers risk losing their incomes if Congress fails to agree to a stopgap funding bill before then.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 58 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This pushes the country's death toll to 9,874. Health officials reported 1,853 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, there are more than 39,000 active cases in the country. The Health Ministry says out of over 471,000 countrywide cases, more than 422,000 people have recovered. It says over 210,000 cases have been detected in Sindh province. Punjab has reported more than 135,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, over 37,000 have been infected so far. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Munir Akram, says the world must unite in its fight against COVID-19. Akram, who also heads the UN Economic and Social Council President, said this on the International Day of Epidemic Preparedness. Akram urged the world to ensure adequate financial resources against epidemics. He said our response towards all epidemics must be of solidarity and international cooperation, and everyone should have access to vaccines. Meanwhile, in his message, the World Health Organization Director General said we all must learn the lessons the pandemic is teaching us. Tedros Adhanom said all nations should invest in preparedness, capacities and strong primary health care. In the U.S. state of Illinois, police have arrested a suspect after 3 people were killed in a shooting at a bowling alley in Rockford. The nighttime incident left 3 others injured. Talking to media, Rockford Police Chief Dan O'Shea said the investigation is still going on. O'Shea said the motive of the shooting was not clear yet, and investigators describe it as a random attack.
Responding officers came to the scene. Calls were coming in. There was multiple victims. At this point, it's still an ongoing investigation. We do have 3 individuals that are confirmed deceased. We also have 3 confirmed other individuals that have received gunfire and are being treated at local hospitals. At this point, we have a person of interest in custody.
Now, in the U.S. state of Tennessee, federal agents are investigating over 500 leads and looking at charred sites of yesterday's explosion in Nashville. Talking to reporters, FBI Special Agent in charge Doug Koneski said investigators were working to identify what appeared to be human remains amid the wreckage. Koneski did not say if the remains belonged to the person behind what officials called an intentional act. He said the authorities were looking at a number of individuals in possible connection to the incident. Koneski added FBI's Quantica was also taking part in the investigation. The explosion at a motorhome left 3 people injured on Christmas Day.
We can't confirm any individuals or anybody we've identified. Again, as we've mentioned, we have over 500 investigative leads, and we're following up on every one of those. So there are a number of individuals that we're looking at. So at this point, we're not prepared to identify any single individual.
Now, archaeologists in Pompeii, the city buried in a volcanic eruption in 79 AD, have made an extraordinary finding. They dug up a free-scored shop that served of the ancient equivalent of street food to Roman passers-by. Details in this report.
Archaeologists have made yet another interesting discovery in the ancient city of Pompeii. Known as Thermopolium, Latin for hot drinks counter, the shop was discovered in the Archaeological Park's Regio 5 site. Traces of nearly 2,000-year-old food were found in some of the deep terracotta jars. It contained hot food, which the shopkeeper lowered into a counter with circular holes.
This is an extraordinary find. We are in the Thermopolium of Regio 5, where excavations began 2 years ago, when we found only one side of the counter. A very beautiful counter, by the way, with a nymph riding a horse. Maybe this fresco was dedicated to a nearby fountain, because this Thermopolium was placed in front of a small square, one of the most beautiful squares of Pompeii.
The front of the counter was decorated with brightly colored frescoes. Some depict animals that were part of the ingredients in the food sold, such as a rooster and 2 ducks hanging upside down. Archaeologists also found a decorated bronze drinking bowl known as a petera. They also dug up ceramic jars used for cooking stews and soups, wine flasks, and an amphora and some bones.
Now we can start the analysis. The material inside the container to know their content, what type of food was solid, and what passers-by in Pompeii could buy, drink, food. A truly extraordinary evidence of the Mediterranean diet that we will know soon.
Pompeii was home to about 13,000 people when it was buried under ash, pumic pebbles and dust. It endured the force of an eruption equivalent to many atomic bombs. About 2/3 of the 165-acre ancient town has been uncovered.
Now, amid a pandemic, a CHOLITA woman is lighting up the long hours of wait for her clients at a hair salon in El Alto, Bolivia. Find out how in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has ruined people's lives in different ways. But despite all this, hairdresser Gladys Espejo welcomes her clients by dancing to the traditional music of the Cholitas. She wears the traditional high bowler hat and puffed skirt. Espejo makes a difference by being the only Cholita woman to offer styling and hairdressing services in the outskirts of La Paz.
My story begins with my grandfather because he made a foray into the art of hairdressing. Later, my father became a hairdresser 30 years ago, and I learned to cut men's hair because I cut my father's hair.
In recent years, Bolivia's Cholitas are imposing new fashion and beauty standards in a country where they were once routinely stereotyped and discriminated against after being considered mates of the middle classes.
A great majority of my clients are Cholitas who participate in different beauty contests. This makeup is important when the Cholitas show up to these events and want to win a title. Without a doubt, good makeup can cause a visual impact.
The Cholitas hail from rural Aymara and Quechua communities. For generations, they were denied entry to certain restaurants, taxis, and even some public buses.
Now, in Russia, thousands of lights have illuminated the capital Moscow ahead of New Year. Celebration state media says 1,000 Christmas trees were lit and 4,000 installations set up for this holiday season. With endless decorations and light lining its streets, Moscow transforms into a winter fairy tale during the holiday each year. This year, despite coronavirus restrictions, a huge crowd gathered to admire the lights. Around the capital's famous landmarks, including Red Square, the Kremlin, and the world-famous Bolshoi Theatre, the famous GUM Gum Department Store has also been decked out with extravagant decorations both inside and out. Pakistan's trade with African countries has increased by 7% this year. Advisor to Prime Minister on Commerce Abdul Razak Dawood said trade rose to $4.18 billion in 2019 and 20. Dawood said this was a result of Pakistan's Look Africa campaign. In an interview, he said Pakistan will participate in the International Khartoum Fair for the first time next year. The advisor said Islamabad will hold the Pakistan-Africa Trade Development Conference in Kenya next month. Now, Pakistan trail New Zealand by 401 runs at the end of day 2 of the first test at Bay Oval in Mount Maunganui. The visitors ended day 2 at 30 for 1 after losing their opener Shan Masood for just 10 runs. Abid Ali is still on the crease at 19 along with Muhammad Abbas. Earlier, New Zealand were bowled out for 431 with Kane Williamson top scoring with 129 runs. Shaheen Shah Afridi was the pick of the bowlers for his 4 for 109. While Yasir Shah took 3 wickets for 113 runs. This is the first test of the 2-match series, with the second slated for 3rd of January at Hagley Oval in Christchurch. Now, still in cricket, India lead Australia by 82 runs in the second test of the 4th match series. The visitors were 277 for 5 at the end of day 2 at Melbourne Cricket Ground. Skipper Ajinkya Rahane is still on the crease at 104, along with Ravindra Jadeja playing on 40. Earlier, Australia were bowled out for 195 after electing to bat first. Manus top scored with 48, while Jasprit Bumrah sent 4 batsmen back to the pavilion. Australia are 1-0 up in the 4-match test series after winning the first test by 8 wickets. Now in League One, Nantes have appointed former French coach Raymond Domenech as their new manager until the end of the season. Domenech last managed France during the 2010 World Cup, where they crashed out in the first round. He also led France to the 2006 World Cup final, where they lost to Italy on penalties. The 68-year-old replaces Christian, who was sacked earlier this month after a string of poor results. Nantes are 16th in the standings with 15 points, 3 above the relegation zone after 17 games. They next host 4th place Rennes on January 6th. Arsenal beat Chelsea 3-1 at Emirates Stadium to end their 7-game run without a win. With this win, the Gunners have climbed to the 14th spot, while Chelsea are 7th on the table. Alexandre Lacazette and Granit Xhaka scored first-half goals to make the scoreline 2-0 at the interval. Bukayo Saka sealed 3 points for Arsenal in the 56th minute, with Tammy Abraham scoring a consolation goal for Chelsea near the whistle. In another fixture, Manchester City beat Newcastle United 2-0 at home. Ike Gundogan and Ferran Torres scored goals for Manchester City. Now in basketball, Minnesota Timberwolves beat Utah Jazz 116-111 at Vivint Smart Home Arena in the NBA. D'Angelo Russell scored 25 points for Timberwolves, while Malik Beasley added 18 points. In another fixture, San Antonio Spurs beat Toronto Raptors by 119-114 at the A&T Center. DeMar DeRozan top-scored for the Spurs with 27 points, while Patty Mills added 21 for them. Fred VanVleet was in red-hot form for the Raptors, scoring 27 points with 3 rebounds. Now, Russia says a ban from officials attending international sporting events is unacceptable and unclear. The Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled to keep in force sanctions against Russia for up to 2 years. In an interview, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia will draw all the right conclusions from the decision. But permission to have national symbols on sports uniforms was a relaxation compared to the 2018 Olympics. The sanctions bar Russia from sending an official delegation to the rearranged 2021 Tokyo Olympics. The 2022 Winter Olympics and the 2022 World Cup but allows Russian athletes to compete under a neutral banner. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.